Yeah, well, I don't live in NYC, so they can
It's
just
what it means here too.
forget about it, okay? I've I've sanitized my hands and take the bag and then just keep twisting the bag to create more and more pressure, with the bag itself to squeeze the fruit and to let the juice out. It's a messy proposition, and the downside of that particular method is that you're also basically squeezing solids through the mesh itself, and so it's less solid when it comes through, but it's still goosh that gets caught up in your racker and your racking cane, so that you end up with crap in your secondary or a clogged racking cane, which is worse.
And the other thing that it doesn't happen with every fruit, but there are certain fruits where if you squeeze this, like say, I think pear skins is one of the things that it will happen with, is if you squeeze the bag, you can cause it to release a lot more tannins into the mead than you were originally intending.
That would be bad.
And it can, well, it depends on what you wanted. I mean, I don't know if you've ever just had like a scraping of pear peel without eating the rest of the pear with it, but it's got a fair amount of tannins in there, and I think it was Medicine or Pete, one of the heavy hitters anyways, was saying that if you squeeze the bag, it can cause a serious release of tannins that you may not have wanted in there.
I think it was Pete on when we did the Melomel episode with him.
Okay.
When he talked about Mel's. So, yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I know I read it on Got Me in several places as well. Yeah. And I think I actually discussed the matter directly with someone, but it's probably been a couple of years since I talked to anybody about that. But yeah, I mean,
so
it's going to depend on it's going to totally depend on the fruit as well. But if you really, really want to know too, what you can do is let it drip dry for a little while, and then grab a corner of it, sanitize your hands, grab a corner of it, and like squish the hell out of a little tiny piece of it into like a shot glass or something, and test it, and see how different that tastes versus the rest of your batch. If you're not sure whether or not you should squeeze the bag.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion.
And this is a regular wine fruit bag, or is that something that, or is that like what I used to use for hops when I made beer?
Yeah, I use hop bags. So I mean, you want something that the key here is, regardless of what you use, the mesh should be pretty fine, because you don't want too much.
I have
of the
used
solids
pillowcases.
Yeah.
I've used pillowcases in a pinch. You wash it and then boil it in a good amount of water for 5 minutes to get any residual laundry detergent out of it, and also sterilizes it.
Yeah. Although that's a secondary thing, guys. Don't use that as your primary. If you can get a bag, get a bag. If not, then use a pillowcase.
Yeah, I have a nylon mesh bag that I got from a brew place in Nova Scotia, oddly enough, and it's fine, and it actually has an elastic bit so you can stretch it over the mouth of the bucket, which means it stays open while you're trying to put food into it.
Food?
And fruit, whatever. Hey, don't forget, rhubarb technically is a vegetable.
This is true.
So, whenever you're trying to put stuff into it, the biggest problem I always have is, not enough hands to pour the pot of stuff into the mesh bag and hold the bag open at the same time.
Yeah.
So I've gotten into some pretty interesting contortions trying to manage that. But back to exactly what you want to use. I went to the fabric store and I bought some nylon mesh, and I made my own little spice bags for that. So I used cotton yarn that you would use for crocheting a dish rag, that type of yarn, and I find that sanitizes fairly well. Yep. So I would just dip the whole bag in my thing of sanitizer before I was using it, and that worked really well for that. And I also got random fabric, and I made my own. I made a drawstring fruit bag that holds about a gallon of fruit, and I've been using that thing for years. And I've got another where I actually managed to get my hands on a couple of sheets of muslin, and I sewed those together, and that's about the same size as a pillowcase. So that's what I use, and I really only resort to using a pillowcase if I can't get it, if all the rest of my fruit bags are in use.
Yeah. And for those of you wondering out there, the bag does not have to be, if you get a bag that would be reusable under normal circumstances, the fruit's obviously going to stain it, whatever color the fruit stains things. But you can wash that. I actually have run mine right through the laundry machine, and then
Yep.
you just
Yeah,
soak it.
all my fruit bags get run through the washing machine.
Yeah, and then like AJ said, you boil it to get any residual laundry detergent out, and then just dip the whole thing. Just I've got these gallon glass jars that I use when I'm making cordials or doing demonstrations at living history events, and I basically will make a gallon of sanitizer. And that's kind of like my sanitizer for the batch, so to speak. So anything that I'm going to be using, I just dunk it in there, and including the entire bag, and and just use that. But that way, that the whole thing is sanitized.
Well, I go half a step lazier, and I just I figure if it's just been boiled for 5 minutes, it's sanitized.
Yeah, good point.
So I sanitize my bucket, and then I have my tongs that have been in the pot with the bag while it's boiling, and then I just use the tongs and put the bag into my sanitized fermenting bucket. That's another thing. I highly suggest using a bucket if you're going to use fruit for anything, because
getting it out
the only exception is if you cut your JAO oranges into eighths, they should come out. And
I learned that one
should.
the hard way.
Yeah, and if you're having trouble, apparently a crochet hook works really well.
Yeah, I finally figured that one out. After my husband, and a half hour of my husband holding the carboy upside down and cursing at me while I tried to fish the quarter wedges out, and it was like, yeah, really? And another thing to think about, too, in the bucket versus carboy thing, getting the bag in and out. I mean, if you've got, think about it, you can take the bag itself, will easily fit through the neck, but then if you then pour a gallon of mashed fruit in there, how are you going to get that out later?
Yeah, exactly. If you're using a carboy for your primary fermentation and you've got fruit, I would not bag it.
No.
I don't know.
And
I don't
that's
know
what
that
I
it's
ended up doing was just the one time I had to do that, and it was a mess. Racking later was just a pure D mess. It was terrible.
Now, that said, the only time that I don't bag my fruit is when I'm doing a variation on JAO, where I'm expecting for the fruit to sink.
Yeah, because that's an indicator.
Yeah, exactly. Because when I'm, if the fruit's going to be staying in there long enough that it's going to sink, then I don't mind racking away from it, whatever. And I don't feel the need to bag it in that case. The only time I would is if it was something that I wanted to remove at after a certain amount of time. And for everything except a JAO, I don't tend to want to leave a fruit bag in the bucket for longer than 2 weeks, because at 2 weeks, anything that's coming out of there is out already.
Yeah. And what I noticed, at least with strawberries, is they turn white. Basically, all the strawberryness gets sucked out of them, and they turn white. They're ghost strawberries. So,
raspberries do something similar, and pumpkin kind of as well. It pales.
Blueberries do a little bit, yeah. But fruit preparation is a big thing, not just the chopping of it, but a lot of people don't realize that many fruits are they have wild yeast on them. They you don't know where they've been, basically, and that's not necessarily
or
pesticides. Or pesticides,
depending on where you got it. They may be pesticides too.
Right. So washing your fruit is really important to creating a better mead. And a lot of people, they're not quite sure, but you think about it, any of you that have worked in restaurants, you remember, especially if you were in food prep in a restaurant, they dunked the lettuce in that stuff to sanitize it. And I don't even know what that stuff was. I mean, I worked in one of those restaurants.
Probably sulfites.
Yeah, I think it was sulfites. But now you don't want to necessarily use sulfites to wash your fruit at the beginning. But for instance, strawberries, blueberries, any of the smaller berries, you can take those, sanitize a sink. And I have stainless steel sinks, so this is pretty easy. Sanitize a sink, fill it up with water, and just dump the fruit in. And scoosh it all around and get it clean, get the stuff off of it, and then let the fruit sit so everything that's not supposed to be there can float off.
That's pretty much what I do, only I use stainless steel mixing bowls, because I even if no matter how much I bleach it, I don't trust my sink to be sanitary.
Yeah.
So Yeah, just because I don't trust other people in my kitchen when I'm doing fruit. So what I do is I tend to have I'll have a bowl with the unwashed fruit in it, a smaller bowl for rejects and stems and bits, and then a big bowl full of water. And I go and take a big old double handful of the fruit, put it in the water, suzzle it around for a little while, and then pick it out a handful at a time. And the good stuff goes in. Usually, it depends on whether I'm using it right away, or if I'm freezing it. If I'm freezing it, I got the freezer bags right there, and if I'm using it right away, sometimes I'll put it in either one of my stainless steel stock pots because they've got a good lid, or into another bowl, depending on how big of a depending on what other processing I need to do. So I just wash them in water and just try to get anything off. If I see bird poop on anything, I don't put it in the same water as everything else. It gets washed separately in the sink because the way I figure on washing is that the best that a big vineyard doing grapes is going to do is hosing the stuff off and letting it drain.
Pretty
and
much,
then just picking out everything. So I don't stress out too much about, what's going into it. But, I just try to make sure that all the dirty bits get washed before I try to use them, and I'm not going to stress about every single bacteria because I know I'm not going to get them all. Even with a sanitizer, I'm probably not going to get them all.
Well, and honey is naturally antibacterial anyways, so
until you add the water.
Well, true, yeah, that does dilute the effect down, but it still has some of that quality, albeit diluted, after you add the water. But exactly. I'm with you there, and it's about the same thing. Picking out the icky bits.
Picking out the unripe ones, the bad ones, the stems, if you've got actually I don't really wash blueberries because they get hand picked into something clean and we do the sorting right there. So, if my hands when I'm picking blueberries are not clean enough to, I eat them right off the vine. If my hands aren't clean enough for me to be eating from, then, the wine's just going to have to deal with it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, see, I buy, I don't do a lot of self-picking, but I go to the farmers markets and buy them from the farmers, that bring them. And so you get whatever you get in there, and sometimes there's the bad ones,
And you can't be guaranteed that the person who picked your berries washed their hands first.
Oh, of course not, yeah, and that's exactly right. So unless you're, like you do, picking yourself or picking from your own stock, then, assume that it needs a wash. And for anything with greens on it, like strawberries have those little green tops, greens are bad. You don't, at least in the context of the fruit, you don't want the green bits in there. They will impart a bitter flavor, and it doesn't take much.
Yeah, you always want to make sure you trim things. Now, apple cores are fine, but don't put leaves in. And I always take the stems out because I usually end up processing apples through a food processor, and it gets choked up on stems. But
is there anything like someone like me who would like if I want to make a blueberry mead, for example, I have no other recourse but to go get it at a supermarket. Does supermarket fruit have anything that I have to worry about?
Well, they have probably more pesticides than, say, like an organic farmer's market's going to have, but wash them. That's all you can really do is just put them in a clean, preferably stainless, like stock pot works great. Like AJ was
float
saying.
them in some water.
Yeah, and float them in some water, and clean your hands and get your hands in there and kind of move them around so that they're getting wet all on every side, and kind of the water's kind of running over them, and that will float it off. That's honestly, that's about the best you can do it. And I have made meads. Hell, I've made cordials with blueberries I've bought. Of course, granted, I'm adding a lot of vodka to those, but I mean, I've not gotten any off flavors from that. So like as not, it's going to dilute to the point where it's not a problem.
Yeah, chances are it'll be fine. No.
Yeah. Now, if
I do have a friend who was in the SCA who absolutely refused to try one of the entries because he was judging the mead competition, and somebody had put in a dandelion mead, and he absolutely refused to even taste it, and they were highly offended, but he could smell the pesticide on them.
Well, some people are super tasters, and they can smell things that others can't smell. I mean, Pete's that way.
Well,
the man's like got a ridiculously good palate and nose. Like
I don't think Bill was. I just think that the person who made the dandelion wine didn't realize they'd been sprayed and
that could be too.
couldn't smell it.
And
couldn't
it's hard
smell
to
it.
wash dandelions. That's
Yeah, exactly.
lots of nooks